what we've covered so far is we talked a little bit about the basic overview of what ORM frameworks are and why they're useful in the first video. Then we did a basic CRUD operation, and insert, update, delete operation using a single table on a single table using entity framework. And then we covered validations using entity framework. What we're going to do with this video is we're going to cover slightly complex one-to-many relationships with entity framework, and we're going to see how we can insert data and access data using a one-to-many relationship with entity framework. So let's go ahead and start creating an added table. In the first video, we had gone ahead and created the cars table, which basically has the car ID, which is a primary key, auto increment, along with a brand name and a model name. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new table called car details, and I'm going to start storing car detail ID, which is also going to be an integer. It's going to be a primary key, and that's also going to get auto incremented. I'm going to go ahead and change the identity specification is identity to true. And now I'm going to store in, say, purchase date for the car, because the same car can get purchased multiple times. And I'm going to store the buyer name, right? And this is going to be an in varchar 150. So these are basically two things that we want to store. And of course we need a car ID, because we're going to have one-to-many relationship between these two tables. I'm going to go ahead and save this particular table, right? And I'm going to call it car details. It's always a good practice to keep your table names in plurals, because entity framework is going to try and turn it into singular objects. So car details will become car detail. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And let's go ahead and quickly draw a relationship between the two tables. So I'm going to throw car here and car details here, and I'm going to go ahead and close this. Let's go ahead and bring this here. Car comes here, car details comes here, and I'm going to go draw a quick relationship between the two tables. I'm going to pick car ID out here, and I'm going to go ahead and save this, right? So let's just go ahead and save this. So the relationships are built. I'm going to go ahead and remove this diagram because I don't require it anymore. So once the relationship is done, I'm going to go into my entity model, and I'm going to update my model from the database, right? And this time I'm going to go ahead and add a car details object to it. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly add a car details object to it, right? And effectively what you notice out here is that now car has a collection of car details. So one car can have multiple details, and each car detail has a parent car, right? So entity framework has created these for me. A couple of things out here when I go into update database from model, couple of things that you would have noticed out here are these two options, which we had an option of picking every time we are updating the model. And the two things are, one is with entity framework asking me if it should attempt to singularize plural objects. So cars, should it become car or should it leave it as cars, right? And the other is including foreign key columns in the model, and this is the fact that it's showing the car ID, which is a foreign key out here. Now in a typical ORM world, there is no reason why car ID should be required here, because every time you create a car detail object, it's going to have a car object inside it. So you could always do car detail object. If it was called X, you could always do x.car.car ID, and you are able to navigate to the specific car ID. But the reason why this is helpful in some cases is because entity framework uses lazy loading. So if you just need a car ID, right, entity framework does not have to go and fetch the car object, right? And that's lazy loading. Lazy loading is when entity framework decides that it needs to fire a query against the database and get the data only when you start accessing particular attributes which require it to fire the query. So for example, if you go into car, right, and we'll look at lazy loading in detail in this demo itself. So if you go into car and if you were to hit the car details attribute, that's when it would go and hit the car details table and start firing the queries to fetch car details. But if you're only accessing the car, it would not fire the car details query, right, against the database. And that's useful in this case, because if I just need the car ID, I don't need to fire the query against the car table, right? So let's quickly go back into the code that we have out here, and let's quickly start writing code to add a car and some car details to the database. So let's say I have a new car, right? And I'm just going to use object initializers this time to add this thing. So I'm going to say my brand is again Ford, and this time my uh, model is going to be 195. Car model is going to be 195. And notice out here that I've gotten a car details. I'm going to leave this empty for the time being, right? So I have a car object that I've created out here, and now I'm going to create a car details object, and I'm going to say car detail, and I'm going to create a new car detail. I'll again use object initializers, and I'm going to say that my purchase date is date time dot now, and my buyer name is, let's say, anything, right? uh, Now, and along with this, the parent car, right, of this car detail is this car object that I'm creating in the line above, right? This car object right here. So uh, I have a car detail object created. This is one way of adding a car detail, right, where you assign a parent at the time of creation of the child, right? So this is one quick way of doing it. The other way of doing it would be I go ahead and create a car detail object. So let's go ahead and create a car detail object, a second one, and I'm going to call this additional car detail, and I'm going to create one more car detail object. And this time let's go ahead and use object initializers again, and let's go ahead and create purchase date to be date time dot now, right? And let's say buyer name this time can be any random buyer, right? So uh, that's done, right? We have two car details created. Notice this time I did not assign a parent car to it, and the reason why I did not do it is now I can actually, this is another way by which I can add child records. Is I'm going to go into this particular table, and I'm going to say car details dot add, and I'm going to go ahead and add a car detail out here, which is effectively this newly created car detail that I have out here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this. Now I can quickly do db dot cars dot add object, and I'm going to go and save this car object right here, and I'm going to do db dot save changes, right, which is going to go ahead and save the changes to the database, right? And I'm quickly going to do a console dot read line, or maybe a write line, which says car and related records saved to the database. And I'm going to quickly do a console dot read line out here, right? And let's run this code quickly. So what you will notice is it not just goes ahead and saves the car on the database. Let's quickly look at both the tables. Open the table, let's run this. It is not just going ahead and adding the car, it's also going ahead and adding the car details along with the car, right? So that's basically the idea of being able to add objects through the object hierarchy, right? I'm not explicitly writing queries to save car details on the database, but entity framework understands it and does it for me, right? So that's your basic overview. Now let's quickly go ahead and start looking at how to access data. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and fetch data, and we're going to run through this very quickly. I'm going to say db.cars.single or default, and this time I'm going to try and get a car where the model number is equal to 195, which is what I had created right now, right? So I'm going to get this car back, and once I have this car back, I'm going to do a console dot write line, and I'm going to say car with id, or let's just say car 0 fetched from the database, and let's do a car id here, right? And I'm going to do a console dot read line, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to be very sure that lazy loading is working here. So it's going to wait at this point of time where I can see which are the queries that got fired on the database. And once I've done this, I'm going to do a for each car detail out here in car details, I'm going to do a console again dot write line, and I'm going to print the car detail buyer name, right? So that's done, and now I'm going to say that records fetched. And let's run this code really quickly, right? And before we do that, let's go ahead and start a SQL profiler so that we are aware of exactly what's going on. Let's quickly go ahead and start a new trace, and let's log into our database. Let's start a new trace. Let's go ahead and create the trace window to begin with, and now let's run this code. So notice that when I run this code, it goes and fetches the car for me. Let's go into SQL profiler, and notice that it has, for the time being, it has just hit the car table, right? Because there is no reason for it to hit the car details table. It's the code is standing at somewhere this point, right? It's on this console.read line. Now when I hit and enter, it's moving forward for me, and it's going and fetching the car details. So at this point of time, it hits the car details. The point being, lazy loading is working here, and it's fetching only the record that it needs as and when it needs them, right? So another thing that I could have easily done is I could have directly fetched the detail object if I wanted to. So there are two ways of navigating. There are multiple ways of navigating. So I could have done a car detail object out here, and I could have done a db dot car details singular default, and I could have gone ahead and fetched the car detail that has a buyer name that is equal to anything, which is what we created, right? So this effectively is going to go ahead and fetch a car detail for me. Now what I can do is I can do a car object now and say that this car is equal to the parent of this car detail that I just fetched. So let's go ahead and do a car detail dot car, and now I could actually come in and I could have easily said that the brand name of this particular car is something else, right? And or whatever, something, and then I could have done a db.save changes, and it would have gone ahead and updated the car table even though I navigated it through the car detail object, right? So that's basically two-way navigation. What I can also do is I can actually do a direct console.write line, and I am going to go through, let's say, this car detail, and I'm going to get to its car, and I want to see the brand name of that car, right? And I'm going to do a console dot read line out here, and let's run this code very quickly. We can remove all of this is not required, and let's run this code very quickly, and notice that it goes and fires the appropriate queries. Even though car details, the brand name is not present in this particular table, it goes and fires the appropriate query and gets it from the car table and shows it to you, right? So that's your basic navigation that you can do through the objects, right? And the point is that you can do two-way navigation. You can go from a parent to a child and a child to a parent. It's typically something like an inverse in a framework like Hibernate or NHibernate, if you're aware of that. Now this is basically it. This is a one-to-many relationship with entity framework. In the next video, we're going to talk about many-to-many relationships, and then we'll go into inheritance and hopefully data services and take it from there. But this is what we have in this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.